So in today's lecture, I'm going to talk about evolution before there were genes. So this is the genetic code, and it's a remarkable code for many reasons. The first reason is that the genetic code is universal. We have the same genetic code as jellyfish. We have the same genetic code as corn, as pigs, as elephants. Every animal has the same genetic code. That's how we can do genetic engineering, which you've doubtless heard about. We all have the same genetic code, so take genes from a jellyfish, stick them in you, you'll glow green. Isn't that great? So you couldn't do that if we had different genetic codes. So that's the first attribute of the genetic code, that it's universal. Now there's a second one that really was only fairly recently discovered, going back about 20 years or so. And this is the following. The genetic code is extremely good at minimizing errors. So let's suppose there's been a mutation. So the sequence in your genome has been slightly screwed up. Or let's suppose that the translation apparatus doesn't work very well, makes a mistake. You're going to get the wrong amino acid. If you get the wrong amino acid, you'll get the wrong proteins. If you get the wrong proteins, you'll die. That's not good. So wouldn't it be great if you had a genetic code that if you make a mistake, the amino acid that you get is going to be pretty close to the one you should have got, and therefore hopefully won't make too much difference. So guess what? Our genetic code is pretty much as good as it can possibly be at minimizing those sorts of errors. So it's really, really good at mitigating the effects of this kind of misreading or this kind of mutation. In some sense, we'll say then that the genetic code is optimal. It's not truly optimal, but very, very close to optimal. I want to answer the question now of how it came to be that the genetic code had this structure. Now you might just say, well, the genetic code is optimal, but how good is good? How good is very good? How likely is that to have arisen by chance? Well, we know the answer to that. I can't explain to you in this lecture how we know it, but the probability of this happening by chance is much less than 1 part in 100 million. So something happened, something special happened, and what happened was that the genetic code evolved. In fact, it evolved before the last universal common ancestor. It had to have evolved before the last universal common ancestor because if it evolved afterwards, we wouldn't be able to do molecular phylogeny to look at the translation apparatus to deduce the existence of the last universal common ancestor. So we know there was life before the last universal common ancestor, and we know that during that period of time when life was starting to sort of get going, the genetic code evolved, and it must have evolved very rapidly, so that 3.5 to 3.8 billion years ago, we had a full functioning genetic code. So, question, what evolutionary mechanism is there that can evolve things so fast that something as complicated as the genetic code could evolve in a very quick timescale? Well, I've already told you the answer in this lecture. There's only one thing that can do it, and that's horizontal gene transfer. So the same mechanisms that are causing the bacteria in your gut to evolve rapidly and defeat the medical community's attempts to counter bacterial infections, those same evolutionary mechanisms, generalized evolutionary mechanisms, gave rise to the evolution of the genetic code and the evolution of the cell more than 3.5 to 3.8 billion years ago.
Darwin shifted the question of evolution to the origin of species and focused on the origin of species, as in the title of his book. Not big tree, not the big universal tree of life. But Darwin argued in order to have a deep evolutionary phylogeny or deep evolutionary genealogy that is classifying organisms naturally in terms of the way in which they evolved in the course of evolutionary history, one had to distinguish between trivial characteristics and the essential characteristics of an organism. Again, Darwin's world was a world of plants and animals. And how you did this with animals was easy. Well, it wasn't that easy, but it was easy in the sense that there were morphological traits that you could, that were deep in the organism. So Darwin argued the best way to do it was to look at embryonic characters, because those characters would evolve very, very gradually. And they may in fact be stable, highly conserved in evolutionary time. Whereas adaptations would be piled on top of these deep highly conserved developmental characteristics. Well, none of that was available for microbes. Microbes didn't have embryos, didn't have great morphologies. And the way in which one classified ever since Darwin was through comparative morphology. Right? So now we're caught in another false dichotomy, just like the plant-animal one that we try to group all of life into, or one between a prokaryote and a eukaryote that we try to group all of life into. Even in our evolutionary concepts or conceptions of life on Earth generally, we have this other dichotomy. And that dichotomy is, are you a Darwinist or are you a creationist? Creationist meaning that you invoke supernatural phenomena on Earth to account for the course of evolutionary time. That you don't believe we are of this Earth, that we're created in some other fashion, but not by natural processes on this Earth. So the problem with that dichotomy is that evolution and Darwinism are conflated. They're seen as one thing. To pose the question, are you a Darwinist, is to say you are an evolutionist. If I say, are you an evolutionist, the automatic response is, oh, you're a Darwinist. Right? And so what I'm saying is that we have to break away from that dichotomy because that's a false one, and that we can be evolutionists without being Darwinists. And we have to understand that our principles of evolution have to evolve, and they evolve with the data. And we've only begun to have access, and we're just scratching the surface of the great diversity in the microbial world. And there may be other things afoot, that Rose likes to talk about, a cosmic evolution, right? That I've always believed that evolution is bigger than life, way bigger than life. You have evolution first, then you think about life. And if that's true, then we have to think of cosmic principles through which life is formed. Life is not an accident.
So I think 100 years down the line, people will know Rose's name, just like we know Darwin's name. 100 years down the line.